I'm Srini Rao, and this is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast, where I speak with creative entrepreneurs, artists, and other insanely interesting people to hear their stories, learn about their molding moments, tipping points, and spectacular takeoffs. Hilary Rubin's difficult childhood resulted in an incredible work ethic in which she started creating demand for herself at a very early age. Her need to survive gave her what she referred to as a PhD in street smarts. Listen in as we discuss her incredible journey from stealing food to making six figures. Hilary, welcome to the Unmistakable Creative.
I'm really excited. Well, I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you. I mean, you and I connected by way of our mutual friend, Melissa Casero, who is truly masterful at somehow getting guests on this show. So, for those of you guys who always ask, how do you get on the show? Talk to Melissa. She may be able to help. So, I want to ask you my first question, which is, tell us a bit about yourself, your background, your story, and how that has led you to doing the work that you do today.
Well, it's a very wide question, so I want to keep it as succinct as I can. My story, it starts off like from the beginning. I feel like the hard part of my life had to start in the beginning. I was adopted. And so right away, out of the womb and all of that, I was imprinted with my own abandonment issues and not fitting in and just rough stuff and not even realizing that and had to over years really kind of face that as an entrepreneur and also in the work that I did. And so my life was supposed to be the perfect Jewish upbringing. And it wasn't. I was adopted. I was picked because I fit. My parents waited 7 years to adopt me so I could match my brother. So it was very much a product of the 70s of people didn't want to know, you didn't want people to know your kids were adopted then. It's very different than now. And so my life, instead of, it was meant and was on a track of me going to private school and having money and whatever that means, being the upper middle class. And basically I would have grown up going to private school, meaning like sent away to private school during the year and then summers overnight camp so that my parents weren't really, I was just basically a purchased thing, like a suit. So that was kind of what my life was supposed to be. Whether I was supposed to become a lawyer like my father or what have you. But things changed. My parents got divorced at 5, and that's when everything got really rough and tumble. And my brother, when he came back to us, I was abused physically and emotionally, and he was in drugs. And so there was a lot of neglect. My mother worked a bunch of jobs just to scrape by. So we went from a big house to a 2-bedroom apartment, and I slept in bed with my mom. That's happened through elementary school, junior high school, in high school. I had a lot of that. So there was just really moments of how my life was, and very quickly I had to learn how to create some kind of persona and image to be something that I wasn't, which bit me in the butt many years later. And so I had to survive. My life was based on survival all the time. And the interesting thing is I always saw the good in things. I don't know, it just was instilled in me. And it was okay, I could always see there was something good. And so I had contrast because I had family members that would come and take me away when I was abused. It was like, oh, this is how life's supposed to be. Somebody makes dinner. I'm not eating junk food and stuff. And so there was just many years as things went on, and my mother got remarried, divorced, all that stuff. My brothers were drug dealers, so that was my first exposure to entrepreneurialism. I just really knew that I had to find another way. So how I found safety was in a refrigerator box in Philadelphia is where I grew up. And when people threw away the boxes for refrigerators, the first kid to get their hands on it was like a gold, you got gold. So I remember outside of the house that we were in, it was row homes. There was this box that I was in, and I brought all my crayons and my pillows, and I created this little getaway for myself. So it was through art and photography and self-expression, which really saved me, which then later on, I worked very early on, whatever jobs. I worked at trade shows, selling jewelry, setting up the sets, like the booths for my aunt, because she was, that's what she did, is she sold jewelry. So that was like my second phase into seeing someone, like, it was like seeing a woman work for herself, because I didn't have a lot of positive role models and I was very hungry for it. So that was and I'm realizing that now as I'm telling you, because I've never shared this before, is I saw that she worked for herself and she taught me a lot of things, like always have good relationships with people, know things about their family, like really teaching me to be focused on the individual and how to connect with people. And so I just, and I was like preteen when I did all that. So I was always really working. I wanted to be put to work, right? Because it helped me stay safe, anything outside of my home. And so it didn't matter what jobs I did, whether I worked for a pizza place or I wrapped gifts, like I just did whatever I could. And then later on, I guess in high school, I got a job in fashion doing windows. One of my friend's sisters managed a store. So that exposed me to fashion and went, oh, I can become this other person. So on the outside, everything looked normal. I was able to put myself together. I was able to recreate this person. And at a very young age, I was dating older men and going to clubs. Like, it was just kind of crazy. I had a lot of insecurity. I was pretty messed up on a mental level. But I knew that I had to get out of Philadelphia in order to survive, and I did. So I went to FIT. I was in the fashion world. I didn't finish school. I just used street smarts. It was like whatever I could do to kind of hustle to make it work, because I needed to survive. I was in the really beginning part of my life was running away from things. That's really what got me to do things. And I did sales. I could sell ice to Eskimos. Like, literally, I just knew how to do it. And that saved me, really. And then as things went along, I didn't finish school. Because there was just other stuff. My mother passed away from cancer. It was just like crazy. And I just wanted to work. I just didn't feel like I had enough time to do anything. It was, I got to work. I got to get out there. I will learn on the job. And I went to school for display and exhibit design. So I didn't even go for regular design, because I didn't know how to sew. And I just feel like I didn't have the time to sew. So I already did windows, and I was like, all right, I'm just going to use my skills. It was always like, what can I do and how can I figure it out? And like, how can I really sell myself? And I feel like I did that all the time. As I was like running from my past constantly. And so I did well. Like, I was able, I was able to work it a lot. My teachers hooked me up with different jobs. I was doing whatever I could. And then I ended up working at ABC Carpet and Home in New York, which is a huge store now. And they were just starting to bring in home stuff. And I went and started doing that, and I would just get stoned on the job. And I got fired because I didn't take I didn't do what they told me to do. I just went off and did what I wanted to. And they're like, you need to do it like this. And you need to set up like the table. This is how you have to be creative. And I was like, what? You can't tell me how to be creative. Like, get out of here. So I got fired. And I just really, then it was like, okay, what's next? And I just always networked. I always went out to parties and hustling in New York. And I had friends. And it was just, I would be like, all right, I would just say, just look for jobs. And it was interesting that whatever showed up, there was a job for a fashion magazine, for a menswear magazine. And my job interview was walking with the fashion director. And he asked me a few questions, and I didn't have the experience. And he's like, can you do this, whatever? And I said, yes. And I got the job. And I did that. And that really built, like, that started to shift things for me. It was like, oh, I have responsibility. I'm a fashion editor. It was just like, again, still running. And basically I had a lot of different jobs in the fashion world, because everyone in the fashion world is reinventing themselves. So I was with a bunch of misfits, that did not have a lot of personal growth. And then I basically shifted things around and started to do PR because I was interested, and I got bored and was like, all right, I don't want to do this. I want to do PR. And I started my own PR firm, not knowing anything other than receiving PR stuff. And I produced fashion shows, and I did a fashion show at Steinway Hall, which I don't think they ever did before. And I got all these people to donate stuff. I mean, it was amazing. I was just able to convince people to do whatever I asked them to do, which was a good power. But it really, that all led me to a great place where I was interviewed to work at Prada and to do PR, to be their PR manager. And I did some other jobs, but I, again, had no experience in PR. I dressed the part because I knew how to become, like, I was like an actor going, okay, this is who I am. And I got hired for $20,000 less for the role. So that person saw something in me and saved money, or basically got the money. And then I did that, and I was really good. I was really, really good at it, and I really loved it. And then I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. My whole running away caught up with me, and I thought my life was over. I was like almost being in a prison, and I thought that because fashion was everything for me. And then I realized I had to do some work. I had to look at what was going on. So that's when I got given my first self-help book, Louise Hay, Heal Your Body. And that's when it all changed. You know, I just was like, I could be a victim, but I've never been in my life, or I can just be a wellness warrior, or just keep going on into the unknown and do something else. And that's the road I took. Fast forwarding, today I'm symptom medication free. The beginning of my work from fashion led me, you know, and I had a bunch of different freelance gigs that I did, whatever I had to do to survive. I found yoga, and it was like the first time anyone ever said, you know, I matter in the world. I mean, it was totally like, what? The philosophy cracked me open. And I said no to a lot of things and fought the medical world. Didn't go on depression medication, all this stuff, didn't do a lot of therapy. And basically what happened is I just decided to leave New York and come to LA and do a yoga teacher training and totally changed my life. And I just asked for a lot of things from the job I was working at, and everyone said yes. Like, I was just really good at convincing people to do what I asked them to do, you know, because I also really believed in a lot of the things that I did. Like, at that point, it was like, I'm just going to go be a yoga teacher. I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to figure it out. And that's kind of what I've always been doing, and I still do it, but now it's a lot more organized. Mm-hmm. And I did the healing work. You know, I had to forgive my past, and I had to, you know, really look at, like, here's this kid who's like this little punk who was fighting the world and running away. And there was the spiritual, you know, there was a lot of like my own finding my spirituality and not doing things because they looked good on the outside, but actually starting to go, well, what do I want to do? Right. Mm-hmm. That's where it started to flip. Right. Because it's so easy today for kids or for even entrepreneurs to go, oh my God, I want that business. Right. And then people can figure it out. And then you're like, whoa, no, this isn't really what I wanted. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically, you know, I left in 2002, New York to come to LA. And I became a top yoga teacher. You know, I immediately realized that I learn on a kinesthetic level and an auditory level and a visual level. So it put everything together, and I quickly started teaching at a place called City Yoga in LA, which is no longer around. And I got on their schedule, and like I left New York and moved here, and then boom, like things just went. And because of my PR background and everything, I used my story, and I got in, you know, over time, yoga journal. I did yoga DVDs. I traveled the world teaching. I taught for about 10 years. And then I started to transition, and I wanted to coach. I wanted more. Mm-hmm. So I found a mentor, and I went that way. And now, that's what I do. 2013 is when I had my last yoga client. I'm a big believer. I've always done one thing and had an interest in another, and kind of did them side by side until like I shifted and just let go of something. So I've always been that way in my life for the most part with my work. And now I coach, and I don't have a certification in coaching. I think it's great if people feel they need certification, but as you've heard some of my story, I just got a lot of results for myself. I've healed a lot to come from the background I've come from, and actually be married and have a healthy relationship, to me, is probably my biggest triumph. To not to carry on the dysfunctionality that I experienced. And now I coach coaches, to do, not to like steal food to eat. Cause I know that was a moment in my life when I was a kid growing up, which I didn't share, like, when my house was like run by drug dealers, I had to steal food to eat. I've had to be in some like compromising situations. So, it's a long story because this is 40 years,
Right.
So just to kind of give you that is, today I just look at my life and I count my blessings, and I'm just amazed that, yes, we can really recreate ourselves, but do it from more of pulling me towards what I want as opposed to running away from something. And that's kind of where I am today. I really believe in what I do, which has always been what has allowed me to succeed. And then I believe in the people that I work with and come across, because I see in them, the thing that people saw in me, whoever encouraged me, I just feel like that's my role, is to, inspire people and to create and all that, but to really encourage people to become themselves as opposed to becoming something else, somebody else, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, makes all the sense in the world. So as you might imagine, I have tons of questions. So, I want to go back to the very beginning of this. One of the things that you said that really kind of struck me was that you said, you had become imprinted with the circumstances of your life. And I think this is actually quite common. We spend a lot of time, Greg Hurdle and I, talking about the idea that your temporary circumstances are not your permanent identity. Mm-hmm. And yet for you, getting that imprint really shaped a lot of the way this journey has gone. And I'm curious, when you're working with people, when you're talking to people, how you deal with, the imprints that sabotage us, and how we erase them, or if we don't erase them, how do you, turn them around in such a way so that they serve us?
You are so intuitive, and I love it. You're such a good journalist. Really, I see you as a journalist. I really do, right? Because you really get into that, and you got to the core of what my work is. Like, I'm literally have tears in my eyes. Like, I feel so seen by you right now and heard. So thank you. Seriously, I mean that. I'm not a BSer. Because I look back at my own life, and I took the time to look at what I call my timeline. Mm-hmm. And I wrote all of the experiences of my life, many of what I just shared with everybody, right? Then I started to look at it and I said, okay, what did that imprint put on me? So adoption, what do you think, right? Abandonment. Mm-hmm. How did I deal with that? And I started to look at, because through the self-help books, I just went crazy through self-help books. I didn't hire coaches till way longer. It was like from Louise Hay to like every book, they became my friends, and there's like tears in the pages. So what I've done is I looked at the patterns, and I looked at how things were recreating, and I looked at the things I wasn't looking at. So I looked in my own life first, and I actually taught this in workshops, which is how I transitioned into coaching, which is also what I help my coaches do. Find your system in what you've overcome and what you've done and what tools, what books, what did you do, what did you adapt? So when I work with people one-on-one, because I work with a lot of coaches because they want to coach, but they have all these inner game issues. And I just notice and listen to the language. Language is first. So I look at it as becoming a language architect. It's in my book, which is sitting with my agent that we haven't sold yet to a publisher. But one of the chapters is becoming a language architect. So it's actually paying attention to your language. I don't have enough time, right? My whole thing was having not enough time. So when I listen to people, I listen to the patterns. I listen to the repetitive things that they're saying that are their beliefs. Usually it's not their beliefs, right? If someone says to me, well, I'll say, oh, okay, so tell me where you are. Are you an only child? No, I'm the middle child, and I'm dealing with middle child syndrome. Oh, okay, so do you believe in middle child syndrome? Yeah, I do. Well, there's an imprint, right? That's like, okay, if you believe that to exist, and again, these things in our culture, and I look at people from a cultural standpoint as well, is I take that all into consideration. So, and one of my strengths through Strength Finder is individualization. Which I think is one of the best tests I ever did, because it's surface, but it's fine, because it just said, this is what you're good at. It's like, okay. So I really look at those imprints and I look at the patterns, and then I point those patterns out, and then I go deeper. And then like all of a sudden they'll go, oh yeah. I'll say, but when did that first happen? Like, when did somebody say you weren't enough? So like if someone's like, well, I'm a middle child, I was never good enough as the younger one, and I was never good enough as this. And I'm like, oh yeah, I had that good enough thing. I'm not good enough. And so I said, all right, well, let's look at that. How is that affecting your decisions and your choices? Like, how is that shaping your world? So I ask those questions, and there's usually tiers, and then there's exercises. So I'm very intuitive with my system. I have different things that I do with people, but the first thing I do is I look at their language, and then we look at rewriting it. So we have to look at permission. When I gave myself permission to say no to medication and to go another way, I could go that other way. I didn't feel remorse or regret. I was on fire. It was like, yeah, I'm going to do everything. So I feel like the biggest thing is that when I work with people in these patterns is we look at the patterns, we look at the language, and then we create the reframe and we point out how it's showing up. That's one part of it. Now, again, the permission statement I feel is really important because I'm giving myself permission to release, not to let go. To me, when people say let go, it doesn't work. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, oh, just let go of it. It's like, excuse me? How can I let go of something that I've been holding so tightly? And it's like being on the monkey bars. You know, when you're on the monkey bars as a kid and it's like, just let go and touch the floor. And you're like this little midget, as a kid. And then it's like, if somebody says, just release your hands a little bit. So it's like, I can release and then I can let go. So this is just something I noticed is when people give themselves permission to release a pattern, then we put in a new pattern and they can use that verbally and hear themselves. It's not an affirmation. It's not whatever Tony Robbins calls his thing, which is old stuff. I mean, it's not like I'm recreating. It's like I'm just letting there be an own evolution of what worked for me. And most of my clients, that's what those permission statements, and also I create meditation specifically for them so that they start to hear they're enough. They start to hear the things that they've never heard, and then they get to validate themselves because so many people, all of us feel like we're not enough. All of us feel like we have our abandonment issues. We're all human. We have the same feelings. The only thing is different is our perspective on it. And when we can see what our perspective is, then we can change it. And that's what I learned from yoga philosophy. It was like, oh, that's another way of looking at it, and one of my teachers said, it's like, hold on to what you believe, but be flexible enough to let it go. Because if a better idea comes along, take that on and let go of what you have. Right. That's the whole breaking the ceilings. So
interesting.
Hopefully that's helpful. Yeah.
I love that you brought up language. You may have read this book. I'm reading this book called The 3 Laws of Performance for a second time, which is largely based on the work of the Landmark Forum. But the reason I wanted to bring this question up is you mentioned
that's funny.
The idea of language and self-help books. One of the things that I see as a continual pattern, and I've seen this, across the board. And when we finished our event, I specifically told every single person, I said, that high that you're feeling right now after 3 days in this room, I have to warn you that it's going to be gone. Because I think that, people become addicted to that. And I know it because and the reason I brought up Landmark is it was the example that came to my mind. I said, you see these people that becomes their life, but they don't actually go out and do anything. They're like, I'm doing all this self-improvement, but it's like, then, that basically becomes another sort of obsession and another trap. And I'm wondering, I've had happiness researchers here. I've had everybody who talks about this kind of stuff, how you actually escape that trap to turning it into actually doing something. As opposed to fooling yourself into thinking, hey, I'm improving my life, but really all I am now is addicted to Oprah or addicted to some other self-help guru.
Well, that's an awesome question. And, being that person too and understanding it, egos are funny. They're so tricky, like mercury. Mercury is a really funny, potent material substance. And, when they have mercury poisoning in the body, they can't really track it, right? It's really hides. And like when I work with my clients, I look at how their egos put together, like what their coping mechanisms are. And, we all have levels of addiction. You know what I mean? So yeah, you go to Tony Robbins, and when I went to Tony Robbins, I met people in line who was like, it's my 20th time going to UPW. And I was like, really? That's interesting. I was like,
so you haven't unleashed the power, clearly.
Yeah, like really, like, and you know what I mean? And so being an activator, I'm somebody who wants to test it out, right? Mm-hmm. That's just me. And I feel what happens is people, and again, Landmark's really funny because I've never done Landmark, but people always think they're like, you did Landmark. I'm like, no. Mm-hmm. Like, but I'm in line with their stuff. I just feel like, because it also happened for me in yoga. I got to a point where I studied so much yoga philosophy, tantric yoga philosophy, mantras. Like I was really in like deep, like Sri Vidya, like serious yoga philosophy. And it was like, how many years can I study this? Like, can I just put this out in the world? And that's a foundation of my coaching, is like, that's where it goes. And I really feel like really for people is to step back and they got to call themselves out. Mm-hmm. A lot of people I feel get addicted to anything, even coaching or tarot reading or astrology, because they don't want responsibility. I think that's the biggest thing people are afraid of, is it's much easier to blame someone for it not happening, or just be like, I'm not ready and I'm going to, it's like people who study forever. It's like, I have a degree, I have a law degree and a doctorate in this and a medical degree. And I'm like, when are you going to stop? Like, you're always going to be a student, but when are you going to go do something? So I feel like it's a couple things. I feel like it's that leap to doing that program made them feel a way they never thought they could feel before. They were encouraged in a way they never were. Mm-hmm. And then it is like an addictive thing, right? There's endorphins that kick in and everything. Now, in those events, people walk away with, if they even put 10% into action, like that's actually good. Yeah. Like that's actually good. So I just feel that for some people, they don't want to do the heavy lifting, mm-hmm. right? So going to the event just happens. And there's just some people who do that, and if anyone who's listening to this, like if you see that you're that person, well, cool. I was that person too. It's like, I went from event to event to event. And then, and then maybe did a little action. And what I would say is, what is it? The biggest thing is like, what is it you're going into what you're doing? Like, what do you want to get out of it? And how are you going to use it? Mm-hmm. And that's what I think is really important, is having the inquiry and having the maturity to just go, okay, I'm doing this event for X. And I want to walk away with one thing that I can put into action, mm-hmm. right? That to me sets somebody up with an intention to walk out with something. And I feel like it's a myriad of reasons. There isn't a blanket. It all depends on the individual, their personality. There's just a lot of things. And for me, I can only say from my experience, it's like, I just went to an event and I said, I want to walk away with one thing that I can do differently. Like one thing. And then if I get that, then it was worth it. And so I already had that set up before, and it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to network and make these connections. It was like, no, I just want this one thing. And then sometimes I've gone saying, hey, I'm open to finding out something I've never learned before that can open my mind in a new way. Mm-hmm. But like that whole like thrill, it's just good to be, it's like, listen, if you get drunk, you know what that feeling is. And then you want to get drunk again to feel that feeling. You just got to call it out if it's a little bit of an addiction. And I'm a big believer I do this with my clients. Stop reading emails and stop consuming information. Like, just stop. I have them do it. Yeah. And I have them do it in my coaching program. I want you to get enrollme.com and just get everything in there so that if you need to get a hit, you get a hit. But I just know for me, what's changed my life in the past year and my business, because I did cross 6 figures in 2013, and I was edging up. And it wasn't like I had big money, like I had money goals, but that's not what drives me. Mm-hmm. It was just like, because I had to deal with my own money issues and clear that up or whatever, but that's another story. But essentially it was like, the more that I tuned everything out, and I wasn't looking outside of myself for answers, and the more that I just tuned into my own information, to the God of my heart, if you will, like, just like, let me just tune in. What is my intuition? Let's go hiking. It's just, getting that feeling that's not a high, but it's a different kind of feeling. Mm-hmm. It's like those events give great feelings, but those endorphins or whatever you can go for a run and have a huge breakthrough and figure out what your answer is to what you want, and then go, whoa, and you can create that on your own. Do you know what I'm saying? So
yeah, definitely.
I'm blabbing a little bit, but
No, not at all.
something I'm passionate about. And I feel people consume way too much information, and a lot of information that creates them to feel anxious. And then they're buying into something because people are good marketers. You know what I'm saying? Which is cool. Like, marketing's cool, but understanding that there's no guarantees. And so you can take the control and have ownership of, I just want one thing to walk away from, or I'm going just to have a fun time. Like, that's it. And I understand that this, that I'm going to have this high, and maybe you make a connection with someone that you keep that going with, So that would be my answer.
So I don't know about you, but vacuuming is not one of those things that I ever look forward to doing. But as you know, your environment has a huge impact on your creativity. So I still like it to be clean wherever I'm living and working. But now it doesn't have to be something that you deal with. If you're like me and you grew up in the 80s, you probably fantasized about the day when cleaning your house would be like it was for the Jetsons, meaning you don't have to lift a finger. Well, the good news is that we're already kind of living in that future. And the easiest way to make sure your floors are clean every day is with the iRobot Roomba Robot Vacuum. It cleans up after itself. The Clean Base automatic dirt disposal takes convenience to a new level, automatically empties its own bin into an allergen lock bag that holds 60 days of debris and traps 99% of pollen, mold, and dust mites, so you can forget about vacuuming for months at a time. Let the Roomba clean for you instead. It learns your home, finds dirt, and empties itself on its own. It's got powerful cleaning performance made effortless. Remember, if it's not from iRobot, it's not a Roomba. To learn more, go to irobot.com/unmistakable.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think the thing that really struck a chord for me is the whole idea of responsibility, right? It's definitely, once you decide that, then you're suddenly responsible for all the results. And of course, if the results are crappy, you kind of have to own that. And inevitably they will be to some degree. When you start, like, nobody starts out perfect at what they do. And one of the questions I constantly get asked is, how do you start? And I wrote about this today. And Greg Hartle said, he's like, you literally just plugged a microphone into a laptop and started talking to people. And even at our event, I said, okay, look around you, see the entire event, see everything we've done, and I'm going to boil it down to you for 3 simple things for how this all starts. I said, I plugged a microphone into a laptop, I figured out a way to record the conversation, and I found a way to post it on a website. And that is really at the foundation of everything that people know of me. That's it. It's really that's all that's actually there. Those are the things. And I think that we overcomplicate things, but the responsibility thing, I think, is really, it's fearful, because it's kind of like, okay, well, then you're going to look like an idiot. And it's like, well, if you're not willing to look like an idiot, you're going to have a lot of problems.
For sure. And you know what? It's just, don't make it harder than it needs to be. Yeah. And I feel like we're programmed as a society, and this is something that I'm really wanting to write about, and I'm seeing it as a pattern, is if it's not hard, then it's not going to work, or it's not going to be, it's like, what if it was easy? Like, what if it is just like taking ownership and going, I'm going to go and talk to 50 people and ask them this one question, and I'm going to put it on camera, and I don't even know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to follow the breadcrumbs. I'm going to follow the impulse to create. That's what artists do. That's why, my program's called The Art, and I'm not trying to plug it, but I'm just saying it's The Art of Becoming a Coach, because I see our life as art. And that artists, sometimes some projects take forever and nobody sees it. And then they have a painting that they cover. I secretly, if I was to do anything, and I hope I would have been a fine artist. But I convinced myself that because I didn't have money, I wouldn't. It doesn't matter. It's another thing. But art to me is everything. And I follow the stories of artists and their struggles, and I just am fascinated by them. Because they were always misfits. They always stood out, and they also depended on other people saying that they're an artist. So to me, like, getting started, it's taking ownership. So if we take out the word responsibility and we take ownership, and you actually realize that you can have space for it to succeed, but you can also have space for it to fail equally, because you're going to learn from every step you take. I mean, and it's cliche, but the truth is if you don't take the first step, somebody else will, and somebody else is. And it is totally scary to do it. But by putting yourself out there, I just feel like, I always imagine, it's this meditation I do with clients. It's like, imagine 1,000 people behind you, and it's inspired by, Gandhi. The 10,000 people were behind him when he was, wanting to fight the Brits. this little dude, around salt, and he just marched and they just took a stand, and there were all these people behind him that were waiting for that little dude to take a stand and walk. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like the motivation of why you're doing what you're doing and going, okay, I don't know what I'm doing, but guess what? It's a lot of fun to not know what you're doing. At least if you're me, like I'm okay with uncertainty in my business, not in other areas of my life as much, but I just feel like taking ownership of what you want to do and letting it become something without being totally attached, most likely you're going to be pretty surprised. Mm-hmm. And I see that all the time. It's like, the iPad happened before the iPhone, but the iPhone came first mm-hmm. because somebody said, like, let's make that a phone. And they waited until that came out. And that taking ownership of starting is just beta and testing, and people do it. That's what farmers markets are for. Like, it happens all around us. So I feel like taking ownership and then looking at other people taking ownership and then being inspired to go, listen, you're not going to be the first person to look like an ass. You're not going to be the first person to fail, and you're not going to be the first person to succeed. Mm-hmm. But however, I just feel like for me, it's always been in my life. Again, like I said, is I was pushed by something and now I feel pulled. And so the question is like, what is somebody being pushed and pulled by? And that I think is something that we all just taking ownership and calling ourselves out is might be scary or whatever it is. But, comedians do it all the time, and they call themselves out. So I just feel like when one does take that first step, I just feel like it's as petrifying as it is. I just see it as reframing it as like, that's the feeling of freedom, mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that makes actually a perfect setup to talking about something else that I want to discuss, what you brought up earlier, which was this idea of creating a persona or image, which came back to bite you in the ass. And it's funny because, we live in a world that is entirely driven by creating personas and images. We're creating these personal brands, we're creating these, media brands, we're using technology to craft images and personas. And, the thing that I always say is you want to be careful that doesn't become something very ego-driven, because it was for me, and it led me mm-hmm. to some pretty dark places. But I'm really curious, when we think about this and how it plays in the world we live in, obviously it matters. I think that you do have to think about the fact that you are crafting an image or persona, whether you want to or not.
Oh, yeah.
That's happening. And I'm curious how one, I'd love for you to talk about how to make sure you don't, end up crafting one that comes back to bite you in the ass. And then, of course, how do you craft one that actually catapults you and really does serve you?
Great question. I got to write it down right now so I have it. Yeah, no, I'm just being here. Here's the thing, totally we create personas. That's just what we do. Like psychology, we need that. Otherwise there's no structure, right, mm-hmm. for the ego. And, and there's all levels and evolution to it. So, how to make sure not to be bit on the ass. I don't know if I can totally answer that, because I know I was really ego driven and I was teaching yoga. Mm-hmm. It was like I was more ego driven as a yoga teacher than I am now as an entrepreneur. And I still was an entrepreneur then, but I was way more ego driven then. And it bit me on the ass, which is what got me where I am. So the question of the question is this is, when you're creating the persona or creating a business persona, my question is, and what I do with people is when I'm looking and working with them in a deep dive and working with a coach of like, let's look at your business. Let's see what you're here to do as opposed to being somebody else. Number one is this: if you're copying someone else, it's gonna bite you on the ass. Number one, right? If you're like trying to use somebody else's voice or somebody else's look, or you're basically, just going, if you're following what someone else is doing, it's not really your persona, right? Mm-hmm. You're hiding behind someone else. The music industry, they change their personas all the time, which is how they reinvent themselves and keep their businesses going. I love the music industry for that. But really is the question I would say for people is to sit and go, okay, if I'm creating this person and this person is like, okay, yes, there's ego, and is it healthy for my ego or not? Am I wanting to be famous? Am I wanting to make a difference in the world? I mean, I just feel like there's some core questions to look at. And if you're saying you want to be famous, that's fine. Actually, Melissa Cicera and I were talking about that. I was like, do you want to be famous? She's like, hell no. And I was like, cool, I'm just curious, because at a moment in my life, I knew that I wanted to be, but I didn't. But when you do go through fame, you give up your privacy. And so it's really, and people say this all the time, like, how much of yourself do you want to share? How much of yourself do you have people in your family that will be affected by it? You know, as you tell your story, you know, my persona and my story, people know it. And I'm okay with that. So at the end of the day, like, are you going to feel okay with what you're sharing with the world? And for some people who are introverts, they need to create a persona that's bigger than them so they can actually step into it. And I feel like if we're creating a persona, the question is who do you want to be 2 years from now? How do you want to be interacting with the world? How do you want people to talk about you? Like, seriously, like, if somebody just met you, what would you want them to say about you? I just feel like those are the questions. It's like, I just know the core is, what do you want to be known for? I want to be known for being generous. That's something that, like, really over time, I realized I was generous, but I was like, no, I really want to be known for being generous and being honest and being loving. And I'm known for being a hard ass. That's why testimonials are good to get from. They're like, oh, wow. So it's really clear of, like, I feel the first thing is how to make sure not to be bit on the ass is asking those questions of who do you want to be in a few years, so that you're like, oh, okay, I want to be this kind of person in my business. Even though right now you might not even know what your business is, but you can know what you stand for and what your values are. So then that will look very different than, like, I just want to be famous. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and to me, that'll catapult you, because if you look 2 years from now, you know, 3 years from now, the person you want to become, then you're going to have, like, a filter to make better decisions in your business. Like you and I spoke about, you know, when you say no and when you say yes to people wanting to be on your program, you start to me, you have I believe you have a ton of integrity. Like, that's awesome. That's a quality that I seek out in people. And so the other side of it is how to catapult it is also, who are people that you respect in business that have personas? What are the qualities that they bring? Not what they do. Like how does it make you feel? And are those the kind of qualities that you want to cultivate within yourself? And I just feel like it's a little bit of inner game. You know, it is the inner game. I believe with, like, these certain things that we create, you know? So that would be my answer. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that's incredibly helpful. I think that, you know, what's interesting, I love the idea of who you want to be 2 years from now, because I think that what that does is it creates a future that you are driven to live up to, or you feel compelled to live into. And that's something that I don't think we spend a lot of time thinking about. I mean, and here's the thing that I think about that is that people think that, okay, by the way, if you create that future and somehow you bring into existence, that everything stops when you get there. You're like, I'm there. And I have finally realized that there is an illusion completely made up by people who think they're not there.
Totally.
So, well, let's do this. Let's shift gears a little bit. I want to get into some of the creative aspects of this, because there's a couple of things you said that really intrigued me. One is that for you, art became this sort of form of self-expression. And so I'm really curious kind of how the upbringing, being surrounded by drug dealers, the influences of your life have actually shaped your creative perspective on things and, and the art that you create. And then I want to get into this idea of the impulse to create, because that's something that I just, it's in my DNA. I have an impulse to create. It's something I have to do constantly.
Mm-hmm. I'm right with you. Yeah. Wow. I just really am enjoying all your questions and your insight. I really, really just feel so seen, and I really appreciate that. It doesn't happen all the time.
Thanks.
You're so awesome. Because you're connecting dots that, like, I haven't connected dots. Like, I'm like, oh my God, and I feel really, I'm not a scripted kind of interview person. I like to share different things. That's something that I feel that's part of my persona, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I'm a little bit, you don't know what you're going to get with me, but no, I, in some sense, this is who I am today, So, my art and looking at artists and lives and all of that, and how the question is really like how I express my art today. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it seems like to some degree, even through all the reinvention of every aspect you're in, there is some element of creativity that is brought into every career that you've had.
Yes.
And what I'm really curious about is how sort of the imprints of your upbringing have influenced and shaped kind of the way you view the world through all these different careers, through the time at Prada, what you do now, all of that.
I was a stylist as well. And I look at myself as a stylist. And as a fashion stylist, I was an editor, right? When I was a fashion editor, I was really good, like how you're really good at bringing people together and curating people. I was really good at finding the things that stood out, like the cool things and putting it together. And how my life has influenced me creatively, which is really interesting, is I can see the things that sometimes I can see the things that are missing, right? Because I was trained to do that in school. Mm-hmm. But then I also look at the things that can be leveraged. I'm extremely resourceful, and I leverage what I have. And this is what I help people do, right? It's not about recreating the wheel. It's leveraging what's there. That's how it's allowed me to be resourceful and creative in my life. Is like, how do I use what I have in a better way? Right? It's not about getting more. It's about using what's there. And, creatively, my home is a way that I do it. But in my business, I have to say, like, I am not a great writer, but I've become a good copywriter from hiring people. And now, like, I'm a really good editor, right? Like, that's one of my creative skills. Like, I can look at copy or a talk or a bio or whatever, and I can edit and I can see a spin. I also, because I'm a good salesperson and understand people and how they function, is I see the spin on things and I see the patterns. So it's really helped me. The biggest thing is how I see the world, right? I look at the music industry and I see how they run business. I see what's under the hood naturally of how things happen so I can figure it out, right? Because I'm like, oh, that's not that hard to do. Like, how can I figure that out, right? Like right now I was very against telesummits, but then I created one instead of a podcast because I know the work it takes to do a podcast, and I don't want to half-ass something. And so I kind of broke down the steps. Like, I just feel like I learned from my upbringing how to figure stuff out and break it down. And then whatever areas I don't know, they just figure themselves out, like, in the moment, right? I'm really good in that way. So it's just like when I go to supermarkets and I look at packaging or I look at how they're selling things, I just feel like it's taught me to appreciate things, and it's like when somebody's a good salesperson, I'm like, you're really good at what you do. I'm going to buy that. Like, thank you. So I feel like my upbringing has allowed me to see resources within things that most people don't see. It's really allowed me to look at, create great metaphors and to see how things function. And I talk about creativity in my work with my coaches. I'm like, you guys need to go to museums. Like, you need to look at things outside of this. You need to get into other things. So I just feel like my whole life has allowed me to become curious, which is what I think is most important really for any entrepreneur, is curiosity. And then to actually look at how systems run and what I like and what I don't. And then just bring along what works and leverage it. You know what I mean? And actually, I also feel creatively, it's like I have a ton of ideas of things I want to do, like you. Like, I have to be creative every day. I mean, really, like, I really do. And I actually create problems or situations for myself to get myself out of sometimes. It's like, or I just do things I've never done before because it really excites me to figure it out. So that's how my background has affected me. And also because of the different careers and what I've done and in and out of it, and my interest in film and directing. I have a documentary that I will do at some point around that I want to do, is that I just know that I have like projects that I might do in 10 years from now, because I know at a certain point I'm going to want that creative expression. So I just really have a huge interest in things, and then I bring it together. Does that make sense? Like, I'm able to kind of use that and then create the pattern and then teach from that. That's just something nobody taught me. Right. And I'm grateful for. Now, the impulse to create, I'm just like you. Like if I'm not in a space of creating, it doesn't even matter if I'm just doing like a brain dump and then I'm taking those ideas. You know what I mean? It's just like whatever process of creation, I really love it. You know, I love the whole process of it, sometimes more than the actual output. If you can, I don't know if you can relate to that. Like, I love the challenge of it. And I bake. I didn't know how to cook, right? I grew up on junk food. So I actually taught myself how to cook, and I taught myself to bake. And I'll just all of a sudden, one of the things that I do, because I have impulse to create, I'm just like, you know what? I want to make gluten-free banana bread. And I'm just going to find a recipe, and I'm just going to make it, and I'm going to tweak it. And I do that because from beginning to end, it either fails sometimes it succeeds. And I feel like it's like this little mini thing that I can have a feeling of like finishing something. And then other people can enjoy it, if I eat it or I don't. So I feel like those impulses to create are really great, and that they don't have to be in your business. They can just be different. Like, I feel like everyone every day has to create. They do create something. You create your life every day. But what if you did like one little creative thing, even if it's just like reorganizing your socks? I just think it helps me not to go crazy.
So let me ask you this on that note. When we're looking at our own lives and looking at the things that we've been through, you clearly discovered a gift and an insight based on your own experiences. And I'm wondering, is that something that we can do, and how we do it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a process of experimentation. If I feel like looking at your strengths and look at what you do, I do feel Strength Finder, whether you like it or not, like now Discover Your Strengths or Strength Finder. That was one of the first things when I did that online test, knowing what my 5 strengths were really insightful for me, because I was like, oh, no wonder why I like this, this, and this. You know what I mean? It's like, no wonder why I'm so in, individualization. I'm so into cultures and patterns. So looking at what you do well, like, I feel like that's really useful. And then the other thing is asking people, what am I good at? What do you get complimented on? What do people call you for help all the time with? Like, seriously, like my husband, he's really great at helping people buy cars, and like he has this whole gift. And I'm like, you need to start a business. He's like, I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm a film editor. Leave me alone. I'm like, start this business. He's like, do it with me. I'm like, no. But what I'm saying is, it's like when people come up to you and ask you for help, or they, I just feel like people tell us all the time what we're good at. And it's like, you want to pay attention to that. And I feel a lot of people take what they excel at for granted. And they also push it away because they think, well, I couldn't, why would anybody pay me for that? It's like, that's what my husband says, what would they can find the information on the internet. I'm like, yeah, that's how everybody's doing businesses now. If you compile it and you tell them the bullshit and the other stuff, it's good. So I feel for people listening, like, what you can do is, like, first, I do believe in Strength Finder. I mean, there's tons of personality tests, but that one I felt was really useful because it was able to look at, when you get that, then you can look at all the things you've done in your past, and you can start to see where the dots connect, right? You get to be, it's like, become a detective and look at your life objectively. Like, like if I was doing the biography of my life, what would I say I'm good at? And what did other people say about me? Like, or if it's a documentary about you. And I just feel like it's that curiosity that you can start to see what you're good at, and then go, well, okay, well, how can I build on that? You know what I mean? Like what you've done, you're really, you're a smart guy, and you have this journalistic ability, and this is just something that's natural in you, your curiosity. And then creating your event, you put people together, and, and you didn't just put the usual suspects together, right? You put something together that was very unique and really beneficial for people. That's something you're good at doing. And while you're doing it, you realize, I'm good at doing it. So sometimes it's the thing that you have, that impulse and that idea, it's like following those breadcrumbs are going to lead you to really seeing. Because I didn't know that I was going to be really good at coaching. I had no idea, right? Until somebody, said to me, actually years ago, someone said, what can you teach to yoga teachers? And at that point, I didn't have an answer. It's like, what can you do or teach to someone who might be doing the thing that you're doing. And again, it might take a little bit of time to figure it out. And I think that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
let's do this. One of the other sort of patterns and themes I've noticed throughout your career and your journey is this idea of reinvention, and you've brought it up multiple times throughout the course of our conversation. And I've asked people about reinvention before, but I want to ask it to you in a very different way. And it's interesting because we've just talked about how we look at the threads of our past and bring them into our self-expression. And one of the sort of really profound realizations that I had just as little as a week ago after our event was that I would always look into the future and I would see remnants of my past, and I wasn't even realizing it, because that's our natural tendency, right? Is to look at, what have we been good at in the past. So what I'm curious about is how we bring those threads from our past into the work that we do without looking into our future and seeing the remnants of our past. Does that make any sense at all?
I'm not quite sure if I'm following it, but I'll do my best, because what I'm hearing from you is, to me, we don't necessarily reinvent, we evolve. Okay, that's what I really believe. Yeah. Is there, because reinvention is reinvention, but I'm just going to play a word and put evolution, right? And I do feel that sometimes looking at our past is not useful because it's not in present time. Mm-hmm. So it's more of extracting like an archaeologist. You know what I mean? It's like these little bits are the things that I rock at, and then it's like, or whatever that is, and it's like, looking into the future isn't necessarily healthy either. I feel like being in the present moment of the intention of what you're doing and why you're doing it and the energy of it, like the enthusiasm for what you're doing, the belief in yourself and the ownership is what's going to move you forward, right? So it's like, you are who you are, you have all your experience. And the question is how are you leveraging all of the things that are in you? Mm. And sometimes we have gifts that lay dormant that we don't even know, and we will never know, right? Until we get thrown into the pot of whatever it is that shows up or what gets created. Okay, I don't want to get too philosophical here, because I will say I do believe we create our life and we create circumstances to get the things that we want, right? Like that and again, doesn't mean everything. It's not every detail, but there's a soul and there's a spirit that wants to evolve here and move a lot faster than our bodies. That's what we're constantly struggling with. So I feel like, when you're creating something like in your future, like you're looking at the future of the podcast and, now the instigator experience. And like, I can only imagine what's coming out of with everything with your books. And I feel like staying more in the present moment and the validation and the appreciation of what's going on is going to be key. Mm-hmm. And looking at it as an evolution, right? Looking at it as like from like an artist. It's like some people only know like Picasso from like certain pieces of art, but Picasso has a huge body of work. And it's like looking at your body of work from where you are now, and it's like where you want to go, you just to go, hey, well, sometimes the clues can be back there, mm-hmm. but sometimes the clues are not. Sometimes the clues are what's showing up for you. You know what I'm saying? Like, what is showing up? Who is asking for this? What do people keep coming to you for? And it's like, why are people keep doing this? So I'll give you an example. When I was teaching yoga, I was digging it. Great. I got to be the superstar, whatever it was, because, it did what it did. And I remember being cornered in Trader Joe's, the supermarket or whatever it's called. I don't know if it's considered a supermarket, but I guess it is. And this woman cornered me, and she was like, and she was dealing with eating disorders, which is something that, I stole food to eat. So I never had an eating disorder really, it is different. My relationship with food is different. But however, she's like, I want you to be my mentor. And I was like, excuse me? Like, I looked at her, I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I need help with my life. And I thought she was off her rocker. I was like, okay, no. Like, thank you very much. I'm flattered, but I don't even know how I could do that. I mean, this woman was like Ivy League educated, but she had I was like, go to a shrink. I was like, get a therapist. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even pay attention to it. And it's like over the time in my career early on, people were asking me for help, but I was like, I don't do that. I was actually resisting it. And it's like the reinvention or the evolution was showing up in the present, and I wasn't even really looking at it. I wasn't saying yes to it. I wasn't ready for it, whatever it is. And I see this a lot of the times. And then I also see people who actually follow those breadcrumbs, mm-hmm. that they're like, so to me, I feel like using the things from your past, it's not like, sitting here and like spending all night and burning the midnight oil to figure out like there's going to be, I don't know, you're going to find like, it's not like, Raiders of the Lost Ark, you're going to find the answer, you know what I mean? And whatever it is, it's more of like, let it happen organically. And I feel like that's really like when you're doing the thing you want to do, believe enough in what you're doing. And if you want to see who you want to be in 2 years, I feel like it's going to be pretty obvious. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I'm just tying that in is look at it as an evolution. And I would suggest to anyone here, whether you go online or go to a museum, look at a body of work of an artist from like when they started doodling to like when they got into the museum. It's pretty amazing to see the rejection. It's interesting to see where the things that the world never really saw and what they became known for, right? I just find that fascinating.
I think we all have those. I mean, I can trace back things I've created. I mean, there's remnants of them online. It's interesting because I think that what I've come to see, especially very recently, is that future is very much unwritten. Mm-hmm. And when we're too caught up in the stories of the past and the limitations of the past, we don't just bring what's useful. We bring all the useless stuff. We bring all the baggage and bullshit into the future and we put it there. And so you're not creating on a blank slate. It's not a completely unwritten future, even though it actually is. And once I got my head around that, it was like, wow, what could I'm not the person I was 10 years ago. I'm not the guy who got fired from every single job I've been at. Yeah, those things happen.
Yeah.
But they're not who I am. Mm-hmm. Not anymore.
Totally, because the thing is certain behaviors were there, and I totally agree with you. It's like, it may be who made you who you are today, and also when you look back, when I look back at myself, I'm like, I was a bit of a punk. I was tenacious. I mean, I was so tenacious. I remember having a fashion, a writer, because when I did PR, like I just was so tenacious that they would put the piece in just because they didn't want me to call them anymore. I mean, again, it's a different time. I had one guy say to me from Women's Wear Daily, he's like, you know what? I'm just going to publish this because I do not want you calling me anymore. You were probably one of the most tenacious publicists I've ever. And I was like, okay, cool. Thank you. Because the tenacity was great, but it's like when the behavior doesn't work, it doesn't work. So that's the truth is you're going to bring your stuff from the past into the present, but you're going to quickly, as an entrepreneur, burn it off. Mm-hmm. If you're like really wanting to go where you want to go, you're just going to learn that lesson and you release it. You just go, wow, or you start to see the transformation that you actually handle the situation better. You know what I'm saying? That's what's really beautiful about the entrepreneurial journey, whatever it is you start to see your own self develop and you become this other person. And, to me, we don't get born as a blank slate. I don't believe that. Right. So blank slate, whatever we bring to it, what we bring to it. And what I notice a lot with my clients or a lot of people, they're like, oh, I thought I already dealt with that. On some level, yes. But yet then you have an opportunity to release it even more and become that much more free. Right. So to me, one of the biggest things I know I do, again, I've never been a fan of vision boards. I used to mock them. I did one a while ago and like years ago, and like all the stuff started happening like 4 years later, and I was like, wow, Yoga Journal's like they reviewed my yoga DVD that I published. And I was like, that's cool. I just like folded it in a drawer and it was like the lining of my drawer. Now, and I don't want to get all weird on everyone, but I recently decided like, I'm going to do these. And I did one because I wanted to look at magazines and everything from a copywriter perspective. Mm-hmm. How are they selling me on this lifestyle? Like, how are they selling me and what words resonate with me and who do I want to become? Right. So it's like, if I look at it as I'm just getting images and we think in pictures. So I just feel like knowing what you want and having pictures for it is really going to be useful. I mean, there's a reason why, Michael Jordan visualizes and every golf player visualizes their swing is because we think in pictures. So when we see our past pictures, that stops us, that creates stuff. Releasing those pictures and going, oh, that's from the past, that's not real now, is part of what happens, right? The fear. Most entrepreneurs say that they're afraid to start. I feel like it's really permission. It's like, just who are you asking for permission from to go? Like, the game's on, start, So I just feel like essentially everyone wakes up every day and the universe or God or whatever you call it is asking you, what do you want? And making the decision of what one wants comes back to the ownership and the responsibility. And a lot of people want to be told, there's a lot of people who want to be told what they want, which is why we see corporate America and the American dream. Like, a lot of the stuff is broken promises because it's changing. And now we're all on that precipice of making the change, right? Of doing it differently. Yeah. From television, communication, from in every area. So I feel like really visualizing, like, if you want to be the next publisher of something, you can go that big. And who do you want to be? And now you just have to start with just publish the blog. You know what I mean? Like, what's the first little thing that you got to do? And I feel like the stuff will come up, and the less we dwell in it and the more we appreciate it and learn from it and move forward. I mean, that's how I survived in my life. That's how I didn't end up I didn't end up a stripper. I didn't end up a hooker. And I was most voted to be that in elementary school. So people had a vision for me. They were like, you are going to be, literally, that's what I was going to be. My family, as much as I was Jewish, were drug dealers. And they're like, okay, you're most likely to be, a hooker. And I know people said that to me. And you know what? Them saying that to me is, a lot of my life, I became who I am in spite, until I realized I don't need to do it in spite and run away. I can actually create who I want to be. Like, I actually can do that from inside, not just on the surface. So circling back is how not to get bit on your butt is do the inner work, whatever that means to you. Don't just do it on the surface, because I don't feel like that's just not going to last. People see through that. Anyway, I circled back because I was like, oh, wait, that goes there.
Well, I think it's fitting. You actually helped me wrap up a conversation really beautifully. I think that now I don't have to circle back. Hillary, this has been really, really cool. So I'm going to ask you my final question, which is how I've closed the last several interviews with. We live in a very, very noisy world, and you and I have talked about self-expression and creating personas. So, our show is called The Unmistakable Creative. So how do you become unmistakable in the world we live in today?
Just seeing everything as progress, and not and just taking one little step a day to be creative in any area of your life. Really, any area. It just one area that you can find whatever creative solution or make something easier or make something more beautiful. I just feel like it's to me, it's all connected. It's not separate. And that the more that you can just validate whatever you have done and see that everything is progress, I feel is really the way to do it.
I love it. Well, Hillary, this has been just mind-blowingly cool. And like I said, I always know when Melissa sends me somebody, I know it's going to be great. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us and share some of your insights with our listeners here at The Unmistakable Creative.
Well, I wanted to do this for a while, and I just allowed it to happen without pushing it. So it allows me, no, I'm serious. Like, this was something that was in my vision and my future, but I just let it happen. And I just, is that I used to be the person who pushed and forced, and, and that behavior didn't work anymore, and so I just let it be. It was like, yeah, it wasn't, you're not on my vision board, but you were in my mind. I'm just going to say there was a picture of you on my vision board, but no, I'm just saying, and not to be like real, with everyone, it's just however people visualize, but it really was, I have to say, it's been the best conversation I've had in a really long time. And as I said a few times, to really be seen and heard and appreciated, to share my story and to share things that I've never shared before in this way, feels like such a blessing. So thank you so much.
Awesome. And for those of you guys listening, we'll wrap the show with that. You've been listening to the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. Visit our website at unmistakablecreative.com and get access to over 400 interviews in our archives.